Good evening and welcome to the University of Oregon very first Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Speaker Series event. You guys are at the first. Hi, I am Ellen Schmidt-Devlin. You guys know me, Executive Director of the Sports Product Management Program. Welcoming everybody here with us at the University of Oregon in downtown Portland, where it was hailing about a half an hour ago. So thank you for weathering the storm, pun intended, to be with us here today. And welcome everybody that we have here online with us. You are in for a very special evening. Tonight, you are going to hear from one of the brilliant women leaders. I won't even say women, one of the brilliant leaders here in the industry. And here to introduce her to us is Nia Pennington. Nia is one of our sports product design students. She's in her second year. She joins us from the University of Kentucky, where she received a degree in integrated strategic communications. She hopes to create products with her degree from the Sports Product Design Program that will enhance athletic performance as well as address accessibility to sportswear for people with different sizes, shapes, and values. Tonight, she's going to utilize her background in storytelling, and she embraced this opportunity. So thank you, Nia, for being here tonight to help welcome our guests here. Thank you very much. Nia.
How's everybody doing? Y'all can answer. Like, we can make this interactive. But good evening, everyone. As she said, my name is Nia Pennington, and I am a sports product design graduate student at here at the University of Oregon. So I just want to start with representation matters. And some of you may be sitting here wondering, well, Nia, what do you mean by that? We're all influenced by someone in our lives, parents, other family members, friends, mentors. People play a vital role in who we grow to be. Nipsey Hussle once said, if you look at the people in your circle and you don't get inspired, you don't have a circle, you have a cage. Essentially, what is a cage? Anybody got an answer? A cage is a box. And what do boxes do? They hold things in confined space. They limit the things on the inside where they have access until something challenges that confinement to open the horizons beyond that space given. The sportswear industry for people of color is a box so confined and selective, it leaves so much untapped potential because of the lack of knowledge or resources. Who I have the pleasure of introducing to you tonight is someone bold and brave enough not only to break the mold of that box, but pave the way for others to do the same. Do you want to know what the best part is of that, though? She's a woman. Named as one of the trailblazing Black leaders in footwear and fashion, as well as Business Insider's 2020 Power List of persons of color transforming the industry. Representation matters. This phenomenal woman currently sits as the VP of Global Apparel at Reebok, served as the Director of Apparel Operations, but also served as the member of Diversity Council at New Balance, where she was an instrumental player in the development of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging strategy of the brand. It's one thing to design for underrepresented groups, but our guest goes beyond that and serves those within her own community. Diversity as a superpower. This was the 2020 Black History Month theme for the New Balance, led by this woman, and she states that it's not enough just to have a seat at the table, but the superpower is in our voice, even if it's challenging or uncomfortable. Seeing a person that looks like you in such a position of influence and leadership inspires younger generations. It inspires this upcoming generation of designers and leaders, and it inspires me. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our class of 2023 moderators, Mason Biggers and Alexandra Runlet, as well as this phenomenal woman I had the pleasure of introducing, Miss Portia Blunt.
Hi, Portia. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you. First up, can I just say, Nia, thank you so, thank you so much. That was just a really wonderful, warm introduction, and I really appreciate that. So your star is pretty bright, my friend, and I can't wait to see what you do when you program. So thank you. Appreciate it. Hi,
Uh,
everyone.
Hello. Yeah, well, appreciate everyone being here. I want to echo the sentiment that Ellen and Nia so gratefully provided. We appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today to learn more about not only your professional journey, but who you are as a person and kind of how your experiences through life, challenges, all that kind of developed to where you are today.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's kind of a little awkward sometimes when you just talk about yourself, but I'm all in and totally game to learn about you all and to give you any kind of nuggets of wisdom that I can.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. We have a list of questions that we would like to go through, and then we're going to open it up to our audiences both in person and online at the end. And we were just wondering for the questions that were relevant, if you could answer from the perspective of you right now as a trailblazer and leader, but also thinking back to the beginning of your career, if you could answer from that perspective as well, since we are on the edge of starting our own. And I'll give it to
Absolutely.
Mason to kick us off.
Yeah, so let's go to the beginning. Kind of not too far back to the beginning, but yeah. So we're. It's always interesting to see kind of the paths that people lead. We might not always have the same interests our whole life. So I was wondering if you could kind of talk to us about maybe the earlier on. So like on your way to college, like what were you kind of intending to study when you went to university?
That's a great question. So, funny enough, I actually went to college as an international studies and political science major. And I had every intention of, being the next Madeleine Albright. And I was going to work for the State Department and travel the world. I was going to do all of the things to make my mom and dad proud of me. And I got to college and I was doing all the right things. I was checking all the boxes. And going down that path wasn't necessarily based on my passion. It was more based on what I knew I could do well. I did well in school and civics and history, and so it just seemed like it would make sense and it was the right thing to do. And my second semester freshman year, I took a course, and I went to when I went to Virginia Tech. So I took a course in the then called Near Environments Department, and it was a fashion merchandising course, and it was history of fashion. And who would soon be my advisor taught the class, and I said to myself, I think I'm in the wrong space. I've grossly miscalculated this college thing, and I changed my major that semester, not telling my parents. And when I came home, it was not the easiest conversation because I completely took a pivot from what was kind of agreed upon with your mom and dad who's paying for your college education. But I just knew. I mean, I knew deep in my bones that, I wanted to do something, one that I could wake up every morning and be incredibly excited about. And politics wasn't going to be it. And I could do it, and I was going to probably do very well. But I just wasn't going to wake up enjoying it and thriving and just really, hunger for the next thing. And when I made that change, it really was a game changer for me. It really changed the trajectory of my life. So yeah.
Yeah, so you talked about like Madeline Albright a little in the beginning. So I'm sure she was a very strong influence and inspiration for you. As you go through your day today now, can you kind of talk about some people that inspire you or give you that like drive and inspiration?
Absolutely. So I would say it's a little bit of a long list. First and foremost, my parents. So my dad has always been a major force in my life, just in terms of, you know, thinking about who I am, being strong in your conviction, leadership, kind of a disciplined approach and focus. But ultimately, my mom has always just really kept me really focused on, looking for inspiration in everything that you do. And she's always been kind of that inspiration light for me and has really kind of been that force of fashion and style and sophistication. And then as I started to progress through school and through my early days in my career, kind of uh, I've kind of curated, I'd say, a board of personal directors over time. And most of them have been various bosses, various mentors. And for me, I have my previous boss who she used to lead apparel at New Balance, Deirdre Fitzgerald. And she is probably one of my biggest mentors and inspirations in industry, in that I saw in her what was possible in a lot of ways, and she had always had a lot coming at her in terms of being very senior in a very boys club environment, and just her evil even tone, even demeanor, and even when things were coming at her that were just very challenging, she always took it and was able to kind of persevere. And being able to watch someone do that day in, day out, and being steady and modeling leadership consistently has really been a significant inspiration for me. So that's probably the most recent. And then I've had incredible mentors and bosses throughout my career that have kind of filled my bucket in terms of different things, whether it's entrepreneurship and understanding, like the grit and the just kind of that focus that you need to kind of build on things. If you don't have it, you build it on your own. That scrappiness, and then having started my career with the military, that in and of itself, I had 250,000 Marines really kind of teaching me what it means to adapt and overcome, and really understand and focus on problem solving. My time as a apparel designer with the Marine Corps really taught me about understanding the needs of understanding requirements, function. When you're building something, is it solving a problem? What is its need going to be for the user? And in our case now, in private industry, what does the consumer need, right? So I learned that very quickly, but it was much more intense and acute in that environment, because it wasn't just building for the need of a consumer's aesthetic and desire, but more for the safety and well-being and vitality of a Marine, to save that person's life when they're on the battlefield. So ensure that you're thinking through everything when you're designing battle fatigues, when you are designing combat uniform, all of those things. And so I take all of those learnings and all of that process and apply it in various things that I do even today. So I would say all of those things are constant inspiration and driving forces in who I am today as a woman, a person, a leader, a professional in our industry. And all of them and all of those things have really kind of shaped me to who I am today.
Thank you for sharing. Could you speak on a little bit more of being a woman of color in the industry, and any advice you have when navigating those untested waters, both at the beginning and towards the end as a leader?
Yeah, it's definitely it can be uncharted territory and uncharted waters often. So, as I said, I started my career working for the military. And so that is probably the purest sense of a boys club, and the purest sense of really kind of being an only and lonely woman in a space where all of your peers and all of your senior leaders don't necessarily look like you. But what I learned quickly, uh, using my difference and as a strength, and so I was able to offer a different perspective. I was always able to offer a different way of thinking or a way of looking at things, to solve an issue or solve a problem, or to create open space in terms of innovation because of that difference. And I've really leaned in on that every step of the way. So even at the early stages of my career, where sometimes it doesn't even have to be just as a woman, but as a new person, right? As a junior associate or an employee, you often may measure your voice a little bit. And I learned quickly that around me, I may have been the youngest, I may have only been the only woman, but everyone was speaking up. And whether they had the right answer or not, they'd hard charge. They'd be like, yep, I got it, so on and so forth. And I look around and I said, but have you researched that? How do you know that? Like, you're so confident. And I realized that maybe if you go in confident and you go in and you speak with authority, they're going to listen and they just might believe you. And they do. So I don't advocate like just spouting out random things, but I do quite honestly advocate for, if you know your stuff, stand in your confidence and speak up and use your voice, because no one's going to coach you to do it. Your peers around you, they're going to speak up and they're going to do their thing because they're looking for a spot for themselves. And oftentimes, at least for me growing up and in my generation, we were often really kind of boxed in, and we were really kind of say, wait your turn, wait until, hold on, let them, see you with your hand raised. And not every situation warrants that. And, as I've come through my career, I've learned that my voice carries more weight than I've given it credit for. And if you can stand in that conviction and really do your homework, do your work, be the best that you can be the expert in your field, that is such a powerful, powerful tool. And it's a superpower that we all kind of have innately in us. It's just how you use it, and whether or not you even activate it through your career. Some of us don't even activate it until we're on the back end of our career, and that's quite a shame. So I would just encourage that. I would encourage, do the work so that you can be that expert and stand in your conviction and confidence so that you can really use your voice. And it has taken me, 20 plus years to be able to articulate that. But I look back and think I did have sparks and moments of that. And it took those mentors, it took those members of my personal board of directors to coax it out of me often. But they gave me a platform for it. And they really were encouraging and nurturing. And the biggest thing that I've learned through that is that you're not always going to be the winner or the victor. Mistakes happen and you're going to fall and you're not always going to be right. But those are the best learnings because you know how to navigate on the next go round, and you just got to take the risk sometimes to do that. So that would be kind of how I would look at that. And it's been a journey. I know I wasn't as confident 10 years ago as I was, 15 years ago or 20 years ago, but it's a building, and it's definitely a journey.
So we touched on it a little bit at the beginning, but your time in the Army, it wasn't just the time. You were quite successful, reaching rank that usually just doesn't happen at the age that you did. I don't want to butcher what rank it was also, so maybe you can tell us about that too. But can you then talk about being at that pinnacle in that career and then deciding to pivot to do something else?
Yeah, I wasn't active duty in the Marine Corps, but I was a civilian member of the Marine Corps team that builds all combat equipment and uniforms. And so I came into that role really young. I mean, right out of school, right, right around the time you all are going into your careers. I was you were me. And I did that role for 7 years, but I definitely moved up the ranks in terms of the civilian rank structure really very quickly. So I was what is equivalent to kind of like, I would say, at that senior manager level at like 24, 25 years old. Like, I was a GS 12, and some people have to work 20 years in their career to get to that level in a lot of government structures. So, I moved very quickly, but it had a lot to do with timing. I was in a very specialized field, And I came with the credentials and the expertise that a lot of other people didn't have. So that afforded me opportunities that, say, a peer that may have been in finance or a peer that may have been in logistics would not necessarily have had. But I came in as a designer, a clothing designer, and my area of expertise was really more technical. So I was working on, developing patterns. I was anything they needed me to do, I was willing to do it. And that, I think, essentially just made me better. I learned a lot about wear testing and the need of really kind of vetting something at every angle. And but it's tough. It was tough because, when you're a GS12 and everyone around you is in their 50s, they're looking at you like you're their child, and you're like, no, but I'm going to make the decision, or no, we're not going to do that, or we need to change or pivot from where you're going because it just isn't working. And that was tough. I mean, that was definitely a challenge, but one that you push through, because you're never going to be in a situation where there aren't challenges or mountains that you've got to work through.
Could you speak on a little bit more of your challenges and how you handled the expectations versus the reality of your career journey?
Yeah, I would say there've been so many. So, like, trying to kind of rack my brain of like a really good example. So when I was at New Balance, I one of the roles, because I was at New Balance for many years. I was there for just under 13 years. And when I took over to lead the apparel innovation team, which was non-existent, and so I just stand that team up. And when you're stepping into uncharted territory, so you don't necessarily have KPIs to measure yourself against. You have to create them, and so on. But as we started getting into things, that level setting expectations was one of the hardest things that I had to learn, because you as a human, you want to please, right? And in a job, you want to meet the expectations of your boss. Your boss is filtering up your projects up to their boss, and so on and so forth. So when you get a lot of visibility, the pressure of succeeding and not failing becomes immense. And so within that space, when projects would fail or didn't hit a timeline, I really, really would take that in, and really kind of carry that in my soul of sorts. And I would just take it as a personal knock on myself, in that I missed the mark. And it took my boss at that time to really kind of shake me, not literally in the literal sense, but figuratively shake me and say, you're in a space that you're supposed to be failing to win. If you're not, then you're not necessarily doing what you're supposed to be doing. And it takes those moments of just perspective, and working through the grief of a failure and the challenge ahead of you, and then taking a step back and saying, okay, what can I control? Let go of the things that I can't, and then focus on those things, right? And in the innovation space, that is the day-to-day grind. Literally, that is the day-to-day grind. You're throwing out lots of ideas, hopes, and dreams. And oh, by the way, they're not here and now. They're mostly on the longer timelines. And as you're getting excited about it and wanting it to come to life, you're sharing it, and then everybody wants it, and then the timelines get pulled up. So it becomes just this very vicious cycle. And anyone who's worked in that space will definitely understand what I'm saying, that everyone wants stuff now. Every product manager wants the idea right then and there. Every designer wants it right then and there. And then you've got the cool stuff, but it hasn't been vetted at scale in production yet. You've just been testing it in a very contained space. So yeah, it works for now, but has it been fully vetted? And then when you get in a position where you feel like you want to please, and you hand it over, and then it can't go to production, and then it sets everyone's go-to-market timelines completely off, then you really are feeling the weight of the world. And so those those challenges are the ones where you have to just step back and you have to map it out and say, what can I control and what can I control now? And be very firm in what the realities are. The reality is, I need at least 12 months to make this work. Now, if you need it in 8 months, then this is what you're giving up. And so when you can get to that point to articulate that and weigh it and show it, and then allow those decisions to be made, you feel a lot better about the ups and downs of the challenges that you're facing. And that sometimes is not a clear path when you're in it. And sometimes you don't realize that you do need to take a pause, or you need to take a step back when you're in it. But that's the learning, right? That's kind of the experience that comes with working through those challenges. And I use the innovation example, but that applies to any challenge. It can be, a product didn't go to market the way you wanted, or the sales aren't as great as you expected, or, a complete activation just kind of bombed. Nobody really, it didn't resonate. It could be anything. And that same process could apply just in terms of taking a step back, figuring out what you need to do, being realistic in terms of what the expectations are, and being really clear and vocal about the payoffs and the trade-offs.
Oh yeah. So my next question is a little bit adjacent to that. So right now, a lot of us are maybe hitting walls in our early career, or seeing barriers to things that we might not be progressing the way we wanted to. But now that you've elevated to that leadership role, can you kind of talk about a time where in the moment you thought it was like the big massive failure, or like the end of everything, but now that you are back a little bit later on in life, just the perspective of that and how it was actually a positive for you?
Yeah, Mason, I let me take a step back to what you said at first, actually, before we go there. I am a huge advocate of being open to the pivot. And I wasn't doing that early in my career. I had a really clear roadmap, and it was a straight up and down. And as I started to go into, various things, and I had to make a right or a left, and I wasn't going straight, it didn't feel good. But as I look back on it, I would not advise anyone coming into their career to stay on that straight path, because you're going to miss a lot. You're going to miss a lot of experiences. You're going to miss a lot of learnings. And it may take you somewhere even bigger than you even set for yourself. And so you may actually get to where you ultimately want to go, and it ends up being a zigzag as opposed to the straight line. But when you're in it and a door is closed to you and you really wanted it to be open, we really, really, we take that in and you internalize it. And that's a hard thing. And I did that quite a bit early in my career. And as soon as I let that go, as soon as I stepped off the ledge and took some risks, a lot of things started opening up for me. So when I think about the challenge or failure, and then kind of moving through it, and not away from it, but through it, right? Like moving through the problem, moving through the failure. When I was at New Balance, I took an assignment to move to San Francisco. The brand was standing up a digital team. High risk all the way around. High risk for the brand, high risk for me in my career, because I was leaving a very stable path, where I really kind of had set my self up to be kind of known for certain things, whether it was innovation or military. And then I kind of looked and said, well, I could do that. I could take this leap of faith. I'm going to move my family, scary, and I'm going to go to San Francisco, and I'm going to work on this digital project. It's undefined. I get to define it. It's out of my comfort zone. I'm working with the tech companies of the world, the big ones of the world, and we're just going to see what happens. Fast forward 3 years in, lots of learnings, lots of great stuff. I mean, it was as if we were like a startup within a big company. We were scrappy, starting a new office, going, doing. complete new space. And the big project, we were building a digital watch, a sport watch for the brand. At that time, there's a lot going on with Fitbit. You've got the all kinds of all the great watches, all of the the big tech companies, Strava, all of that, huge buzzwords, all of that. The watch bombs, big failure, and they shut the entire division down. And I'm looking around at my team, looking around at my boss, and they're all let go except for me. I was the only one left. Now, when I tell you scary, when your peers are let go, your boss is let go, and you're kind of like, what is happening? Like, what? This was a big failure, but it was a good learning for the company. Like, you got a lot out of it, and what do I do? But they brought me back. I was the only one they brought back, and they brought me back, and I took on a completely different role. But the reason I was brought back was because there was value seen in the fact that I wasn't just one thing. I came back and I led design operations for the apparel division, but it was definitely hard, and I had to learn really quickly to not let that failure define me, because being in California and coming back to Boston, and everybody knew, oh, they shut down the digital division, oh, the failure, of the watch, so on and so forth. Mind you, my projects hadn't even seen the light of day. I worked 3 years on apparel wearable tech projects that never got commercialized, never saw the light of day. And I came back and everybody was like, gosh, I didn't even think you're coming back. Like, having to deal with that left and right, it was terrible, terrible, terrible. But it gave me a lot more grit, and it gave me perspective, and it made me really clear on, one, my value. Two, it made me really clear on what I could contribute to the brand, and that I wasn't a one-trick pony, and I could do whatever I set my sights on, and I can build from nothing. I can be in high pressure environments, and I can see through anything, because that was probably one of the hardest moments in my career, to work so hard at something. You're in it, you've moved your family, you've made these big commitments, the brand has, and then for it to not achieve what you wanted it to, was it took a long time. I mean, it took months to kind of come out of that, but it definitely made me better, because I know what that failure feels like, and I know how to move and navigate from it. But it also is one of those things where if you hadn't felt it, you wouldn't necessarily been able to give the perspective in different areas of my life and in areas of business, having not gone through it.
So going kind of off of what you talked about with your value, could you speak on your experience in a non-traditional sportswear brand and how you transitioned to New Balance, and what strengths and advantages you feel like you built from that transition?
Yeah, the coming from a non-traditional background actually was a huge benefit for me, because I came in as essentially as an expert in my field, and I came to New Balance to lead their military product and division. That wasn't in place at the time. There wasn't anyone to lead it, and I knew it inside and out. I knew, one, the industry, I knew contracting, I knew product. And so I just really focused on what I knew best. And then once I got that going, you build a sense of confidence in what you know and what you're doing. And once I got that going, I would then stretch, and I would raise my hand for things. I would raise my hand for projects. And at the time, my boss saw that in me, and he really catapulted me into kind of not being so, always being kind of isolated in the box of military. He was the one that saw in me that I saw that military could be a benefit. Our relationships with military, what we were doing, the fact that the military was so cutting edge and was ahead on so much on the market, and I was tapping into that for what I was doing. He saw quickly that I could bring that in to the inline business. And that was how I was positioned for innovation. So really kind of owning who I was, was really the big takeaway there, in that I was essentially that subject matter expert, and then I was always willing to learn and observe and take things in to apply it to other areas of the business, that then I could learn that. And then you just start kind of evolving. It's almost like the rubber band ball. Like you just start adding rubber bands to it and adding rubber bands to it. That was just kind of how I approached my time, specifically at New Balance, where, for 13 years, I didn't do the same thing. I did a lot of different jobs. I was able to grow and take on a lot of different opportunities.
A recurring theme that it sounds like keeps coming up is you being confident in who you are and just knowing what you're good at. Do you have any tips for taking up your full space for those of us who might not feel that same way?
Give yourself grace. That's what I would tell you. That's an important tip, because as I said, I had levels of confidence, and I would say confidence can be looked at on a spectrum. And it's a muscle you have to really work on and strengthen. So, not everyone is going to come in day one and just exude an enormous amount of confidence. It does take kind of getting into the weeds and really knowing your stuff to anchor you, to allow you and enable some of that confidence. And so I would say, there have been moments where I've been really, really scared, really kind of feeling like, battling imposter syndrome, all of the things, right? We all go through. No one's immune to it. And so I think if you have to bring for yourself is start with lean into your strengths, and don't be afraid of your weaknesses. So when you lean into your strengths, you have this tendency to kind of just like, but I got this. I know XYZ, I know social media. I'm all, I've got I know, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's great. But that's a safe spot. What we tend to forget is that your weaknesses are just as important as oftentimes your strengths. And so being that acknowledgement and awareness of your weaknesses become a powerful, powerful tool. One, your weaknesses give you a clear roadmap of the areas that you should lean in for curiosity, discovery, and learning. Two, your weaknesses are the areas that you most often have to surround yourself with counterbalances of. So when you build a team, if you know that your strength is not finance, bring on someone who is a finance guru, so that you are balanced in that way. So it's never a slight on you to, one, acknowledge the weaknesses, but then to build around them, so that those team members are flourishing and shining. And then it gives you an opportunity to really kind of grow and learn, and then mesh all of your strengths with it. So it just really elevates you. That takes time, one. It takes a lot of self-acknowledgement and reflection. You have to be very self-aware in terms of that. And it's sometimes it's hard. Like you want to go in and you're hot, you're ready, you got the job, and you don't want to disappoint. But I don't know any interviewer that doesn't ask you what your strengths and your weaknesses are. And any person that I interview that just tells me, well, I don't really have any, or I would say it's just time management, I get a little weary, because that's not true. If we were going to do a self-assessment, we know that that's not true. And weaknesses don't have to be a detriment. weaknesses can be turned in a different perspective. And so it's just a matter of acknowledging it and working through it, building around it, and amplifying in a strategic way. But I do think it's a clear path and journey around discovery and learning. It helps you stretch yourself, especially when you know it and you can acknowledge it. And then some of those weaknesses shift over to strengths, and other things become more apparent. So you got to make space and room for that kind of accordion effect that you have as you grow in your career.
Could you talk a little bit about the key mentors or sponsors and support system that you had that helped you unlock those strengths?
Yeah, I when I started at New Balance, my boss who hired me, he he's a serial entrepreneur. So he himself was in a space that he probably, if you asked him today, he probably would tell you like it wasn't for him, because he was used to owning his own business and running it, making the final decisions. And so being in corporate for him was challenging. What I think he saw in me was that ambiguous and gray space and situations did not fluster me. In that, when there was a lot of chaos, when there's a lot of uncertainty, out of the team, his direct reports, I was probably the only one that would be like, okay, what do you need us to do? Or really calm and just kind of weathering it. And he leaned on me for that in a lot of ways. And it really helped me kind of ferret out what I didn't know was in me. It really kind of brought to the surface strategic thinking. And so he oftentimes, and I didn't even realize in real time, I only now when we talk about it, realize what he was doing. But he was using me as a sounding board. One, to challenge me, because he could see the potential in me to think as a strategic leader, to think as a generalist, to push me out of my comfort zone. But he also learned he needed it. He needed me to push him equally. And his peers were going to be confrontational, where my peers were typically going to just say what he wanted them to hear. And I didn't know what I didn't know, and I didn't do that. And usually the conversations would start in my space, but then he would push and ask me beyond military, beyond innovation. He'd say, random things like, if you were running this business, what would you do today? And there's no issues, no money, no investment, nothing was a problem. What would you do? And it would force me to really think it through. And no one had ever done that with me before. And his guidance and his mentorship really shaped a lot in me. And I realized later, I learned that his mentorship, even though it was active mentorship to me in real time, he was actively sponsoring me in real time. And I realized that years later, in that, he would position me in things. He would make sure I was invited to certain meetings. He would throw out a random, you should get a mentor. You need a corporate mentor, Portia. Okay, how do I do that? And he'd say, how about Rob DeMartini? At the time, Rob DeMartini was the CEO of New Balance. And what? No, I don't know if that's a good idea. Nope, that's a good idea. And Rob became my mentor. He was my corporate mentor. I was a junior manager. Like, you're a senior manager running military, and Rob DeMartini is your new mentor. But he was advocating for me. He was speaking on my behalf, and he was articulating my potential in spaces I didn't have access to. And it wasn't a one-time thing. It was years and years of sponsorship that I reaped the benefit of after he was gone. He had set a stage for me where I was looked at as high potential high performing. Half the time these senior leaders had never even worked with me, but I had engaged with them and interacted with them in spaces that mattered, that then allowed me to push on things later in my career, and ultimately was one of the components of decision making when I was the only on my team, whereas the rest of my team members were let go in a very challenging situation. So I would say active sponsorship. We talk a lot about that as leaders. You know, we talk a lot about mentorship and what that means for people, but sponsorship in and of itself is very, very powerful. And it does take a sense of being intentional about it. And that, that's something as leaders that, I take very seriously, and I don't take lightly at all. So, being able to model that today for people who work for me, people I have mentored over time, and it could be as easily as, someone I worked with at New Balance, and I have a colleague at Foot Locker, and I call them and say, you have an open position. I know someone who's perfect for the role. And they get fast forwarded to the front of the interview line. That's active sponsorship, speaking up on someone's behalf in a space, in a room that they don't have access to, but doing it continually, right? And looking out for those people whose voice isn't being heard. Not that they don't have a voice, but isn't necessarily being heard by a particular population of people.
So as we start to try to source jobs and find jobs in the industry, I think a lot of times traditionally you just look at the job description and how your attributes or skill sets fit within the posted job description. But something on the back end a lot of people don't think about is your fit with the team or the company culture. Can you kind of talk about what you think a successful company culture looks like and maybe some red flags to look for as we're going into the sourcing the jobs?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, company culture is incredibly important. One being the job is going to be the job, right? Like that's going to be a checklist of things. But if the culture is one that is incredibly competitive or is incredibly aggressive, and that's not your nature, you're going to find yourself unhappy very quickly. So as you're doing your research for potential roles, potential jobs, you've got to do equal research on the intangibles, the soft skills of a company. And I don't take lightly that, when candidates are in interviews, when they're not interviewing the company, you might want to kind of shift in terms of thinking about that candidate, because you are spending a lot of time in those spaces with those people. You are looking to gain as much as you are looking to give, right? So you are looking to gain knowledge, experience, networking, all kinds of different things as you go into a new role, into a new company. One thing I would look at though is that coming into a corporate structure, be realistic with your expectations. Realistic in that if you are joining a tenured old organization that has had a reputation for XYZ, don't come in expecting it to be like Google, because it won't, and you'll always be disappointed. If think through, you know, I want to have catered lunches, and I want like open space, and I want to be able to work from home 100% of the time. And you basically have a checklist, right? I liken it to the dating checklist. If he doesn't, or she doesn't, or if they don't check everything on my list, I don't want them. Well, I would take pause on that. I would say that you may be disappointed very quickly, because no company is ever going to hit everything on your list. And so you may, really think through that 80-20 rule. if it's going to hit at least 80% and you can live with the things that fall within the 20, then you've got something, right? You're dating myself, cooking with Crisco. No one on the call probably even knows what Crisco is, but
In the blue
you got
can. Come on now, it comes in the blue can.
yes, 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 in the blue can. That's exactly right. I say that with my kids, and they're looking at me like I've got like five heads. But that's one, right? Like level set your expectations, do your research, and that 80/20 rule. And then you also need to think about, like, are you willing to grow with a company? Are you willing to kind of sacrifice this to get that? And if you are, then that's a great thing. I mean, today there's just so many choices for people that you don't have to go into a situation that you don't love. But at the end of the day, everything's not always going to be buttoned up and perfect, and you've got to kind of crawl before you walk. The only other thing I would say to that is, if you have non-negotiables, you've got to stay firm on them, because it'll always creep up on you, and it will always, always, always be something that's kind of weighing in the back of your mind. If diversity and inclusion is a non-negotiable for you, and you want an inclusive culture, which should be, quite frankly, table stakes for every company, but the reality is it's not. But if diversity at the senior level executive team is a non-negotiable for you, stand firm in that, because those are the kinds of things that actually take years and years of institutional rewiring that you may not have the patience to see through. And so don't go into something expecting high expectations and certain things when some companies' cultures just aren't going to allow for it. So just know that you've got to force rank things. The non-negotiables very clear. Don't go after companies that don't fit that criteria. But then also note that if you've got a list of 100, if it at least gets you the 80 of it, may not be a bad thing.
All right, we have one more question, then we're going to see if anyone in the room has some questions. What are some red flags we should be looking out for when we're interviewing companies?
Mm. Major red flag is if they don't ask you, what do you want from us, right? Like, major red flag. um, Major red flag for me is if a company doesn't have a very clear mission and plan and strategy around diversity, inclusion, equity, and at this point in time, justice. A major red flag would be if a company isn't clear on their mission. And for me personally, I like to be within a corporate structure that has a really strong foundation in philanthropic endeavors. And just make sure that that aligns with your personal values, because if it doesn't, you'll always kind of be the odd one out, and you don't want that. But red flags for sure, if they're talking the talk, but they are not fulfilling it, problematic. And you've got to do your research around that, because it'll only really frustrate you as a future associate or employee within that construct. And if they don't have the numbers or don't have the ability to really articulate the value they bring and what they can, what that looks like for you, that's also problematic. And then the biggest red flag for me is if, when you're in an interview and you ask about what does the path for growth and career development look like, and you don't get a strong answer. And it doesn't have to be the right answer, but a strong answer, because if you are interviewing someone who is really genuine and honest, and they tell you, in our corporate structure, you aren't going to elevate incredibly quickly. You will have to kind of pay your dues. You will, you won't be a director in 2 years. I actually kind of can appreciate that. But if you don't have an understanding of what that is within the corporate construct, that's an incredibly big red flag for me. If a company doesn't have space for some levels of career development for associates coming in, and just growth. The last two jobs that I left because of growth. I wanted more, and I wanted the ability to stretch. And the corporate structure, the government structure, wasn't allowing me to do that. So that would be a major red flag in my eyes if you can't get that information from a future employer.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
You're welcome.
so like Alex said, that is all we have on our script right now, but we will start sourcing questions from the crowd. So if you have any, please. Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, you graduated in design, but I was wondering how did you lead yourself into that military position and go into innovation, and what were you really looking for?
Yeah. Well, my degree in design afforded me the opportunity to intern with the military. So I interned actually with at the time it was called Program Executive Office Soldier, that's based in Natick, Massachusetts, and I interned two summers. I interned, and the work on that project, I lots of projects and lots of summers in Massachusetts and so on. But I really had enjoyed it, and coming out of that, my then boss was elevated to oversee all military uniform programs and equipment programs. And I had kept in touch with him. And when I graduated, he had reached out to me and said, "We are looking for another apparel designer, clothing designer to bring on the team. Is it something you'd be interested in?" And mind you, when I was in school, I had finished school and I interviewed various things and I just wasn't really feeling it. And I ultimately decided to stay another year for graduate study. And that was when he reached out to me. So um, I finished up all my postgraduate coursework, and then I started my job as a clothing designer for the Marine Corps. And that's kind of what led me all the way around. So I started as a designer with the Marine Corps, and that role evolved over time where I started actually doing more product program management. So I was managing big uniform programs, managing all their contracts and production and all of that. And that in and of itself catapulted me into New Balance, where I was managing and working on the military programs there.
Okay, does anyone else have a question? If
Hi, Portia. Thank you for talking to us tonight. I know it's late there, so I was just wondering when you're zigzagging between different career positions, and you were going to tech versus being in more, I guess, apparel area. Where would you say are some similarities or some advice you'd give when you're moving into different areas? Say, like if you're going from apparel to footwear or equipment or to tech or wearables, like you were talking about.
Yeah. Well, similarities is that typically process is the same, right? Like process is process. Go to market process and timelines are usually the same. There's nuances in each of those, but it's generally the same. Development I find is generally the same, right? Development for footwear, development for apparel. There are nuances clearly, but you start from ideation and you move all the way through, right? Like, so there you're testing, you're fitting, you're prototyping, like you brief an idea, so on and so forth. Those things don't change. So all of that institutional knowledge applies no matter where you go. And I didn't realize that until I went over on the digital and in the tech side, when I was working with product managers, and I was really equating them to footwear and apparel product managers, but tech product managers really take on a whole kind of whole different aura, really. And that through that experience, I really realized that product managers and what I was ultimately doing on our soft goods side, you're the CEO of the product, right? Like you are really owning the logistics, the strategy, the thought process, the business, indicators, like all of it, right? It's on you to see it through. And that really kind of shored that up for me, seeing it applied in tech, and then really kind of taking some of that robust process that tech product managers apply and applying that to apparel. And then also, I actually was starting to apply it in design operations, and it all works. It really just applies. It's really, you just labeling it something else. But that's what I learned throughout the process, for sure. But you know what? The one thing I have learned is that my design background helped me appreciate what product marketers and product managers do. Once I was in that space and I was doing a little more of that, that helped me appreciate the developer and their role and what their challenges are. I mean, a footwear developer, apparel product developer, I mean, sometimes they have the toughest job, mainly because when you're looking at that triad, you're looking at the designer, the PM, and the developer. You can't move without the other, but the developer usually gets the short end of the stick because they are usually the one that's keeping you on calendar, and nobody wants to hear that. Like nobody wants to hear no, nobody wants to hear you can't, and they're usually the ones that have to give you the harsh realities. So but being in each of those spaces throughout my career gives me a broader appreciation for the value each one brings, and the fact that you can't really function and be successful with one without the other.
We have a two-part question from someone online. What has your experience been like joining Reebok while it was being sold with high employee turnover? And part two, what's your view on the direction of the brand is taking now under the ABG umbrella?
That sounds like a very good question. That's a great question. I would say, again, um, all of my experience and really kind of my foundation coming, one, being raised in a military family, two, working within the military, really positioned me to weather um, the experience. And I hope everyone is lucky enough to kind of experience some level of acquisition and merger, because it makes you a really, really strong professional, in that you have to have a lot of wherewithal. You have to be able to see beyond the here and now, but at the same time you have to move through the chaos. You have to continue to keep the ship moving and keep everything afloat. And then all the business things are swirling, but then on the same token, you really, as leaders, are challenged to really understand the empathetic part of just human nature. It's tough. Any acquisition is always going to be hard, especially when you do have to downsize a workforce. And experiencing that at Reebok wasn't the first time I experienced that. I had to experience that at New Balance as well. Issues with the pandemic as well. Like there's a lot of variables that go into play of a very difficult time and difficult situation, but it definitely grounds you. It grounds you as a leader. It really makes you appreciate not only what you do, but the people around you, because it's never easy having to come in and do your job and being really uncertain, and trying to provide any kind of sense of stability is really what I tried to focus on through that process. As we look to the future, though, transition is challenging and is always a little hard, but there's always light at the end of the tunnel. And so the future for the brand is incredibly bright, in my opinion. Our new ownership has a very different way of doing business and a very different outlook in terms of our structure and business model. which is just that. It's just different. It's not necessarily it's not a bad thing or anything. It's just different. And as we as a company are reshaping and growing into the new structure, I think it's nothing but great opportunity for the brand. Will definitely be more visibility for the brand, um, across the board. You know, as a global brand, the brand isn't necessarily as visible here in North America as it probably could be. And I think the future is pretty bright in terms of that. You know, being able to go into a mall and purchase Reebok, whereas today you probably can't do that. So I'm encouraged, definitely encouraged by it. But I also know that it's very much like making sausage. It is incredibly messy. It's not sexy. It's downright disgusting, right? Like it's gross to make it. But at the end of the day, once you get it in that casing and you taste it, it tastes really good. So like there's something at the end of that line that is gonna, be worth it for everyone. It's just withstanding the journey. And as leaders, we just try to keep a keep the space and keep the environment as still and stable as you can, even with the things you don't know. And hopefully everyone will, stay along for the journey, because I think it will definitely be a bright one for the brand.
We have one more question from online. It's, have you ever thought about branching out and going the entrepreneurial route?
That's a great question. I think everyone in our space thinks about that. Like, truth be told, right? Um, when you're looking at brands and what they're doing, everyone in the back of their mind is like, I could totally do that better, or I have a great idea. I need to bring that to life. So, absolutely, yeah. I've always, thought about it. Now, whether or not I, action it or what have you is to be determined. But I think all of us innately in this space, I don't know that we would be in this space if you didn't have a little bit of that in you, to think about what you could imagine and create, because at the heart of everything, we're all creators. So yeah, my answer is yeah, why not?
Maybe one day.
Yeah.
And so much for your time and the thought that you put into all your answers. How do you balance having a vision for your career while still being open to pivoting? Do you have a particular North Star that's been guiding your decisions and allows you to vacillate a little bit side to side to get to that end goal? Or how do you navigate that?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. So, as I said, like early in my career, I had a straight up and down, and it was pretty hard coded. And it wasn't until probably the last maybe 5 years or so that I started mapping out what I wanted. But then on top of that, I layered on kind of what makes me happy, like what brings me joy. I started kind of populating around the Japanese kind of thought of ikigai, right? So, what am I good at? What can I like? What do I do to pay the bills? What makes me happy? What am I doing to serve the community? And then, basically, it's this intricate Venn diagram that, like, ultimately your purest purpose is centered around your passion in the middle. And once I started to populate that, I really kind of keep that with me across the board. So if it doesn't feel good now for me in my career, I don't even consider it. In the past, even if it brought me joy or it made me happy, or I thought that it was purpose driven, if it wasn't on my list, I didn't consider it. Now I'm open to the consideration of things that I hadn't even imagined, hadn't even thought of. And even though I may have thought I was going to, do XYZ in the athletic industry, it may actually take me outside of it. Maybe I should be teaching. Maybe I should be, starting my own, I don't know, not for profit. But the ikigai helped me open myself up to that, to thinking about that I'm not letting something go. I'm just actually building on in a different way. So that tool I found quite useful and powerful for me, especially in the last few years, for sure. Yeah.
Hi, Portia. I'm Danielle. I'm
Hi,
definitely
Danielle.
feeling very inspired after learning about your experiences and just hearing your insights and your point of view on everything. And looking forward, I'm wondering what you're excited about in the future for our industry.
Oh, yeah. A lot, Danielle. Honestly, I mean, I honestly think we haven't even hit like scratched the surface on what is capable, what the potential is for our industry. You know, over the last few years, many of the brands have been doing such amazing work around um, trying to create paths into the industry, right? Access in. And I don't even think we've scratched the surface on that. I think there's so much more that can be done and will be done. I look at the work of Dwayne Edwards and I get so excited around what he's doing. And it started with a small idea that everybody really kind of poo pooed. They told him he was crazy. Why are you leaving this amazing design job at Nike to go start a design school? Why would you do that? And now look what he's able to do. And that took vision and that took grit, but that also took like just vision and confidence to just know. And to the earlier question, he's been grounded in his purpose. Like he knew, you know, that is what he needed to be doing. Seeing more of that starting to kind of populate and pop up throughout our industry in various ways, whether it's these amazing social media accounts that are like highlighting women in sneakers or you know, doing these small little academies for elementary school kids to get them to understand and know what it means to design a shoe. All of those things we did not see 10 years ago. And that to me is just so encouraging and amazing. So I just know that we're just starting and it's just going to flourish because of amazing talent like you all who have these great ideas that are able to put 1 plus 1 together to equal 3. And then ultimately, you have a whole new way of looking at things, a whole new way of processing, a whole new way of looking at business that, you know, us who've been in the industry for 20 plus 30 years hadn't even thought about, right? So that to me is like the unlock. The other is, you know, when you start thinking about Web 3.0, you start thinking about the metaverse, you start thinking about there are all these new ways to kind of bring things to life. I think it just is going to be incredibly exciting for our industry to just continue to build and reinvent things as we go.
Portia, thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it. A round of applause for her, please.
Thank you all. You all are so kind. Thank you. Thank you.
As we wrap up here, I'm sure a lot of people are wanting to get in contact with you or just want to chat a little bit more. What would be the best way to do that?
I believe you all may have my email address. If not, we can make sure that you all get it. But please reach out, stay in touch. We have quite a few alum in my building, so you know we definitely love the University of Oregon and the program. So please don't hesitate. You know, I definitely want to hear from you. It was a pleasure. I really appreciate all of you. I appreciate the the moderators. You all did a fantastic job. I know it was not easy in terms of preparation, so I definitely appreciate you. I also appreciate everyone who did all the work and preparation for this event. And then this is no easy feat. So, what between you know Ellen, Shelley, Michael, I really do appreciate all of you and thank you for the invitation because this was quite a delight. And don't worry about the time; it's okay. No worries. It's only 10:30. Okay. All good.
Well, I think that will wrap up our evening. So we really appreciate you again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Portia.
Thank Thank you.
Um. Okay. Yeah. I think we're done. Yeah. Go ahead.
So I'm gonna walk on down here. You wanna help me out?